which we meet and pay our respects to their elders past and present. I'll move now just to some short housekeeping. So if you could just make sure you've done the COVID Safe app on the way through and had your name ticked off at the registration desk. The bathrooms are just located out that door and around to your right. And in the case of an emergency, just follow the alerts and follow the green sign out here and down the stairs. So we do ask in the COVID safe environment that you do maintain your social distance. We've got plenty of hand sanitizer around. And if you have been in a COVID hotspot in the last 14 days, or if you are feeling unwell, please come and have a chat to me at the registration desk. At the end of the seminar this evening as well, we invite you to stay on for some more drinks and hot canapes outside and to network with our wonderful presenters and also our branch executive committee. We've got a number of our BEC here tonight who really welcome the chance to have your feedback about our member services and programs. So tonight we're aiming to cover all aspects of team structuring, how to recruit complementary team members, how to build a positive team culture that fosters innovation, and some practical retention strategies you can look at within your organisations to retain tech talent. We also invite your questions and stories and thoughts at the end of the presentation this evening, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Nicola Steele, who's our MC for this evening. Nicola is the founder of JJP Talent Solutions, ACS Queensland's preferred recruitment partner. And since 1999, she's connected over 1,000 ICT professionals with leading startups, innovative SMEs, and visionary corporates in both Australia and the UK. Now, I think this statistic is really interesting. Over 99% of candidates Nicola has placed have passed their probation period and become highly valued team members within those organisations. Nicola is passionate about helping build high-performance tech teams, and she sees that a major barrier to growth is finding the right balance between exceptional technical skills but also ensuring the right cultural fit. Over the last 20 years, she's gained a thorough understanding of what kind of person thrives in a fast-paced and rapidly changing world of tech. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Nicola now up to MC this evening's panel and introduce our panellists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holly, for that wonderful... Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me now. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. It's fantastic to meet you all and introduce you to the panel. You'll notice I've placed a little booklet on your chairs as well, which tells you a little bit more about my approach to recruiting high-performance teams. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It's hot off the press. I only picked it up on Monday. And if you'd like to talk to me, my contact details are on there. But enough about me. Let me introduce the panel. What I'd like to do is introduce each of you by name and position and company. And if you could give everyone a snapshot of your perspective and expertise in creating high-performance teams. So first of all, we have Jane Humphreys. She's the Group Manager of People and Culture at TechnologyOne. Next, we have Lynne Cawley. She's Group Executive, People and Operations at Canstar. Next, Arthur Poropat. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Arthur. Principal and Psychologist at the Performance Relationship. And over on this side, we have Scott Lawry, Associate IT Director at QUT. Then Faith Rees, who is Founder and CEO of SixPivot in Cloud Control. And next, Michelle Cowan, who's Senior Associate at Active Law and is also ACS Queensland's preferred legal partner. So, let's start with you, Michelle. Tell us a little bit more about your expertise in creating or in your involvement with high-performing teams.
To give you a bit of a snapshot, I came from over 20 years in retail management before I went back and studied law as a mature age student. So through that period, did a lot of recruiting, training, performance managing, and learned a little bit about the law along the way. So employment law was a natural place for me. So since I completed my degree, I've spent a lot of time working with employers and their management on developing proactive strategies and good employment framework structures to try and avoid the problems. And the key part of that is to understand how employment law, industrial relations works alongside of HR and organisational psychology to get the right structure in place for the workplace. And by doing so, you can avoid a whole lot of heartache and unnecessary expense and optimise the opportunity for business growth.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Michelle. And Faith, a little bit more about your expertise and your perspective.
Sure. So I actually did a psychology degree many years ago, which I thought I never used, but now that I work with developers all the time, I use it every day. My background has been predominantly from a sales management perspective, even though I now own 2 tech companies, so I'm more on that sort of sales management building side. I've worked for companies like Microsoft, I've worked for a lot of large services companies throughout Australia, and most of my roles within those have either been establishing the state territories for those companies and also establishing product or services within a certain framework within those organisations as well. So obviously with that has come everything from building the strategy around what I have to do in each of those organisations, but then obviously building up the team, which has included everything from sales operations through to technical people as well. So.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Faith. And Scott, what about you? Give us a snapshot.
Yeah, sure. So my background, I've spent the last 20 years working across many different sectors. I've been working in legal, finance, resources, and higher education sectors. Over the last 10 years, worked for companies like Rio Tinto. I've also been working at the University of Newcastle, Queensland, University of Technology. Had to manage a lot of different team dynamics during that period. Working for a global organisation, having to manage global teams is always a challenge, and having to overcome those challenges. I find it quite fascinating just now, obviously, with the challenges of COVID, and a lot of leaders are reaching out with instructions of how you manage remote teams and asking for advice on that. And that's certainly something that I've been doing for the last decade or so, is how do you actually recruit, how do you actually retain and manage teams that can be sometimes on the other side of the world, different teams, etc. So yes, quite a bit of experience in that, and also working in the university sector. Obviously, very different dynamics. Some of the teams have been around for quite an extensive period, and working closely with those teams to help them become high-performing teams.
Fantastic. And out of curiosity, Scott and Faith, what kind of size of teams have you been building and managing and leading?
From my own perspective, it depends. I mean, sometimes you inherit quite large teams. When it comes to high-performing teams, I like about 2 pizzas rule. If you can't feed the team on 2 pizzas, then perhaps there's too many or too little. So I usually use that as well.
Yeah, perfect. And Faith?
I'd say the same from a high performance team, but in the teams that I've built, I started in organisations that were 15 people and built them to a couple of hundred. My current companies are 5 years old. One's got 30 people in it at the moment. The other one's a team of 4. So I'll talk more about that.
And the pizza analogy, I guess that would be circa 8 people. Would you say?
8.
Depending how hungry they are.
Yeah, that's right.
I think in Jeff Bezos' day, you shouldn't have more than a team that's no bigger than what you can be in 2 pizzas.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And moving over to this side, Arthur, give us a snapshot of your expertise, please.
I've been thinking about this, what is the best way to describe my expertise with respect to teams and so on. Factors are always just been fascinated with how people work, and both in the sense of how people work generally, but also how people work at work. My career, I've worked in organisations, in community, private, public sector, a lot of time within the educational sector. As a teaching organisational psychology or human resource management, I've worked in human resource management, which is kind of cool when you can start teaching it. I've also been on the other side of the negotiating table. At one point I was a branch president for a union. So it opens up new pictures on the way in which human resource management works. Some of the things that I've been working on, I'm just about finished a project that literally I started 30 years ago, or at least the bright idea started 30 years ago, of a guide for team leaders and group facilitators on when you've got this problem, what process should I use? What's the tool I should use? So at some point, hopefully within the next few months, that will be coming up as a book called Choose Your Tool. It's going to be an electronic one.
Fantastic.
I've also been working on how do you make personality assessments bespoke, tailored to a particular occupation, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And what's the nub of performance management? And it's not performance appraisal. Definitely performance appraisal. But hopefully I can come back to that.
So you're a bit like me. The power is in your people.
Absolutely.
And I think we've got a few psychologists who studied psychology
It's a disease.
as a degree. I didn't do a psychology degree, but to be honest with you, I used to read the books in the library when I should have been reading the other books. Anyway, moving swiftly on, Lynne.
Yes,
Please
I also
tell
have
me.
a psychology degree. I think,
Yes.
Do you feel better now?
no, if I'd known at the beginning, I don't think I would have actually started. If I knew how long it was going to take, it took me 14 years to finish my degree. I started part-time when my youngest went back to school, so 14 years later, I got my registration, and that was it for me. So I moved into P&C. But so I've been at Canstar for 18 years now. I was telling my story before. I started there, doing data entry when I went back to do my psychology degree. And so I've had a great opportunity at Canstar. It's a completely different business from when I started. It's completely flipped from a B2B company to now comparison website digital company. And so I've been lucky enough not to have to change jobs to do a different role. So I head up at the moment 6 teams. And so I've got a bit of diversity. People and culture is one of my teams, research team, product data, and 3 of the tech teams. So I've got a bit of diversity in my day. When I was thinking about what do we see with high-performing teams, I was thinking from a P&C perspective, we spend a lot of time, and Jane could probably attest to this, working with people who are underperforming or we're working on performance management. So it's really nice to actually talk about high-performing teams. We have a saying at Canstar, no tribe, no triumph. And so what that is within our tribe, it's bringing a diverse group of people together to work on the same project, get them motivated and drive for that goal. And that's how we find we get our best performing teams.
Fantastic. And how long have you been at Canstar, would you say?
18 years.
Which is quite rare nowadays for people to
Yeah, at times I feel like I have to apologise, particularly when I'm talking to the young, when I've got our young tech guys and I say, oh my gosh, you've been there 18 years. So when I can speak a bit of tech and that, they become cool again.
But you worked your way up to that level from the data entry
Yes, I was
part-time
part-time doing data entry. Yes.
to, I've forgotten your job title now.
Yeah, so group executive people in
Group
operations.
executive. Awesome. Thank you. And Jane?
Hi everyone. So I'm the last in a long line of psychologists. Anticlimax. So yeah, I'm an organisational psychologist by background. Currently EVP of People and Culture at TechnologyOne. Been there for about 3.5 years. Saying to Lynne, sharing her 18 years, I feel like I've been where I am for 18 years. Prior to TechOne, I was at QUT for a short period, so my background, I guess, spans aviation, some time at Virgin, Lion Nathan, so alcohol industry, Horizon, guess, training. So planes, trains, automobiles, gear, and higher education, and now tech are my background. I guess I almost feel like I could take a little bit of what each of the other panellists have said around what has shaped my love and interest in this type of work. Obviously, with a psych background, you know, all the dynamics of human behaviour is incredibly interesting to me. I also think part of my expertise might be a long bow, but perhaps perspective is around, so often we overthink this stuff, and keeping it simple and really exploiting people's natural capabilities and preferences is something I get pretty passionate about. It's a fine balance. So we were speaking earlier about that balance between deep technical experts and leadership capability. And for those of you who know about the Peter Principle, so often we promote very technically oriented, wickedly intelligent, deep introverted technicians into leadership roles, and it just doesn't come naturally, and we wonder why they're not successful. So I certainly have seen that in my current remit. I guess less so in the other organisations I've worked for, where, you know, particularly the alcohol and the aviation industry, you've got quite the opposite. You've got extroverts whose profiles are very, very different. So, yeah, I guess bringing all of those transferable environments together and taking just a really pragmatic approach to how we accelerate high performance and manage our poorer performers sensibly, logically and simply.
That's great. Thank you very much, everyone. So let's move on to the first topic. And I think I'll begin from a tech leadership perspective with Faith and Scott. If you were to summarise, what would you say are the key characteristics of a high-performing team? So either one main point or 3 quick bullet points. What would you say? Ladies first. Scott, let's go with you, Faith.
I think from my perspective, particularly working on developers, it's teams that are cross-functional, that there's a deep sense of trust and respect with shared value base with that team. And I guess one that there's lots of characteristics that have been there, but the other one that I think works very well with our team is a sense of psychological safety. And so that's whether that's from management team, whether that's with their customers or within the team themselves, that they have the ability and they feel safe to be able to say what they think, to, you know, have a stupid idea or come up with a question that, you know, they should never feel scared to ask. So I think, you know, they're a couple of the characteristics that I would say I see permeate amongst my particular team now, but that I've seen with the past as well.
And would you say that psychological safety is probably the primary?
I think that's probably the underlying, you know, because that, if you've got that, then you've also got that sense of trust, you've got that respect in the team. So that's probably the underlying characteristic of that.
Fantastic. And Scott, what about you from a tech leadership?
Yeah, so quite similar. Some of the slight differences are what I look for is diversity. Diversity in skills, in gender, etc. What I find is that the more diversity you can have in your team, the more it enriches and helps the performance. Very similar, that is creating an environment that helps to support teams to explore and be innovative is incredibly important. I've seen enormous success in just letting people run a little bit loose, not putting too many barriers around them. And really important, having that mutual accountability. So making sure that the team is working as a team, that they understand their sprint goals or their larger goals, but working together to achieve those goals. I've seen an incredible change in when you create cross-functional teams and how it really dissolves a lot of organisational barriers and how you can see members of teams who have very specific skill sets suddenly start to learn and to broaden their skill sets because it might be that somebody else who has a specific skill set is struggling, and because they have that mutual accountability, that reaching their sprint goals, is that they'll suddenly start to jump in and help, even though they might not have the same level of skills and all start to learn. So we get this concept we call full stack developers.
Yeah.
And it's really, developers have specific skill sets, but if they're working together, they can share these skill sets and they start to work together really, really well.
So that shared accountability, that working together, and also having parameters,
Yes.
that a lot of free reign
Yes,
within there.
absolutely. Guardrails.
Yes, definitely. And then Jane and Lynne, coming from more of a people and culture perspective, what do you see as the main characteristics?
There's probably two main things that I would point out. It's about what we find with high-performing teams is from a leader, that you have a leader who's adaptive. We have to have that adaptive leadership, so be able to change for the situation. The other one I think is really important is respect within the team. So it's a respect for skills within the team, but also respect for how other people like to work. We at Canstar, from a psychology background, we use Myers-Briggs to help people understand, and I think you can use that in different personality assessments, but understanding how other people work really helps you work in a team together to drive for the results. So I find that they're probably two of the key things for high-performing teams.
So having a mixture of extroverts,
Sensing,
introverts,
yeah.
sensing, feeling.
Yeah, and also just understanding that extrovert who is sitting beside you talking very loudly, annoying you while you're trying to code, that's just how they
Sorry.
process things.
That's me.
They're not actually doing it to annoy you, they're actually processing things. So, and the introvert who's sitting there quietly, it's not that they haven't got anything to say, they're actually thinking it inside their head. So understanding that within a team people come from different perspectives, I think helps build that mutual respect, and then you'll see results.
So respect. Fantastic. And Jane, what about you?
Yes, so I'm going to build on respect, but a completely different lens. I think respecting and prioritising your customer is about what creates a high-performance team. So when I talk about customer, I mean equal parts external end user customer, but also your internal customer. Understanding the internal value chain, there's always one part of the business servicing another part, with the ultimate end goal of servicing an external customer. So being respectful of what the customer's needs are, being respectful and prioritising customer feedback, be it good, bad or indifferent, and responding accordingly. At TechnologyOne, and hello Dylan, you'll recall this, we have a thing called the compelling customer experience, and you know, it's something that's probably lost its way in our organisation over recent times that we're very keen to re-energise, but always appreciating and prioritising the customer experience. The second thing I would say, again, quite simply, is around the difference between skill set and mindset. I'm constantly talking to my team and any other team members in the business who will listen about mindset over skill set every time. So if you come with the right attitude, the right lens, the right language, the right approach, the right mindset, you will, you can build skills, you can teach skills, you can learn skills, but coming with the right mindset is that real differentiator in a high-performing individual and subsequently a high-performing team.
And in terms of whether they're at a junior level or a senior level, it's all in the mindset there.
Mindset and attitude. How you show up, yes.
And putting your customer first, the customer being at the forefront of everything you do. Excellent. And then Arthur, from an organisational psychology perspective, which I'm sure the psychologists here will have something to say, but let's give the stage to you. What do you think the key characteristics are?
Well, to be fair, I'm finding it very easy to agree with a lot of things that people said. What I may do differently is to actually provide an overview of how some of these things come together. First thing though, how do you recognise a high-performing team? Well, they're kind of you ever heard that expression of being in flow? They're kind of in flow. They just get things done and not worrying about anything else. They kind of forget about themselves. They're not that worried about, is it mine or is it yours? They just get things done. And when you come across one of those, or you've been in one of those, it's magical. At least it feels magical. And saying that is about as useful as giving you a bunch of flowers when you're a gardener. A bunch of flowers doesn't help you grow the flowers. The things that help you grow the flowers are a bit like some of the things that we've been talking about here. The way I've summarised it, as I say, like I've been looking at this for a lot of times, how you can summarise this reasonably quickly. The first one is, what are the targets? Targets aren't just goals. Targets are actually anything you're paying attention to. If, in terms of mindset, if you've got people paying attention to anything that's taking them away from the work that you're trying to get them to do, that mindset will reduce their performance. It's as simple as that. If you get their minds off what they're doing, their performance will drop. So it might be a goal, it might be a value, it might be a set of measures, something that gets them focused on the task. It might be the way you talk with them, or the way they talk with each other. The second thing is, what are the resources that people have got available to them? Now, those resources, often when we think of resources, we're thinking of things like, what's the equipment or the materials that people have got? Resources are also the only real human resources that you ever need to worry about are skills and abilities. What people know, what they can do. And that's so small part of what you're doing with humans. That's important. But if they don't have those resources, they can't do what you want. The third thing is they need to have some clear consequences. As in, they need to be able to see the measures. They need to get some feedback. They need to see what's the outcome of what they've done. If they can't see that, it's a little bit like getting out, like we were talking earlier about trying to drive or get around on the wrong side of the planet. I grew up in Brisbane. Going to Britain is difficult to get around because the sun's on the wrong side of the planet. You were talking about having the same thing in reverse. When you don't know, when you're getting the wrong feedback, the outcomes are everything goes pear-shaped. Final thing, the fourth of these, is learning. If you're not reflecting on what you're doing, if you're not problem solving when things are going wrong, your performance is going to drop. It's just no ifs, buts, maybes. You have to be constantly doing that. In the middle of that, they kind of set the boundary around your team, but there are two things in the middle that where the magic happens. One is, where's the fun? If you're in flow, it'll be fun. If you're the leader, how do you introduce the fun? You do it by giving people surprises that are focused on the work. Give them something that they weren't expecting that has them go, oh, wow, oh, you're doing that? Something that breaks their head, breaks their mind up a bit. The second thing is, make them feel loved. And, oh my God, I used the 4-letter word. You've got to make them feel loved. This is a relationship that you've got with people. Performance is always a relationship. If they don't feel loved, they're not going to love you back and they're not going to give it back to you. A top performing team, respect is a part of love, support is a part of love, honour, that's a part of love. You've got to do that. They've got to feel, how do you do that? It's little things. It's like saying thank you.
I thought you were going to say saying I love you then.
Well, I'll tell you what, I have come across organisations where that would be appropriate. I've not worked in one of those organisations. Did I say that to one of my staff?
But no,
But things like
saying,
saying,
people down there, we're not doing that.
things like saying thank you. Things like surprising people with a little gift. Or, hey, you've been doing so great today, how about you take some time off? I once had a senior executive actually it's not just once, the senior executive did it several years in a row. At Christmas, every member of staff in their section, and we're talking a couple hundred staff, got a handwritten, personalised Christmas card. I remember her name, this is a long time ago. Did I feel loved by that? Oh yeah. You don't have to do that one. You have to do the one that makes those people that you're working with feel loved.
And it's a card isn't a huge gesture, but
No.
obviously writing out however many
Yeah.
that she did.
She actually knows me.
Yeah, that's it, knowing you.
Yeah.
And that's great, Arthur. Love, fun and magic. Who could ask for more? You just need to create it with respect and with psychological safety and having that free reign and everything else. So, in terms of these high-performing teams, how do you actually assess and select them? And I think, again, let's start from a tech leadership perspective. And I think we'll start with you, Scott.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
I mean, I think when I reflect back on my career and some, it's always interesting when you look at the mistakes that you've made when you're creating or developing teams. And one of the mistakes I've certainly been guilty of in my early part of my career was trying to select the best. So always looking for the best people, looking at resumes and because the best people don't make the best teams. And if you want to think about some of the analogies that you look at sports teams, for example, and there are many examples of sports teams where they try to put the best of the best together and they don't function well as a team. So what you're looking for is the right cultural fit. It's the softer skills which are really important because those technical skills can be taught. You know they've got base level, but can they fit well in the team? Can they work well in the team? And I've gone through that experience when I was being recruited many years ago. It's a company I was really excited about. And it was a very junior position I was coming into. And I remember very distinctly, there was a panel of 4 people, and it was an entry-level IT job that I was going into. And I'd asked, after I was actually successfully recruited, I said, why was there a panel of 4 people? And they said, well, we knew you could do the job, but we wanted to make sure you're the right culture fit for our organisation. So I think it's really important as leaders that you're always looking for the right cultural fit, those softer skills. Can they communicate well? Can they collaborate? Do they have those skills like empathy, for example? Those are the things that you're always looking for when you're trying to attract and also trying to recruit high-performing teams.
Thank you, Scott. And I did a survey recently, and that was the overriding challenge that most tech leaders had was that cultural fit.
Yes.
Not just finding the right skills, but the cultural fit was the biggest issue. And Faith, we'll move over to you. Now, your company is relatively young, I think 5 years old, you said. So, in the early stages of putting your team together, how did you know that you were on the right path, would you say?
It probably hasn't changed.
Okay.
But maybe you've got harder. So I agree very much with Scott, but also in we talk about my SixPivot business, which is a consulting application development business. We actually do recruit for top technical talent, so that's number one. So right from the very start, it was designed that way as well. So we have quite a technical code challenge that someone has to do, as well as a technical interview as well. And there's multiple people on that interview. So first up, we probably recruit in the top 2% of developers. So it's extremely hard to work with us. But then that's not enough. So it is then looking at do they have the same shared value base that we have. So we have a very strong values base within the organisation. So things like which removes the things like ego, it removes the things like it's my way or the highway thinking, which comes a lot with technical people. They have to be very pragmatic, and they have to have an inherent desire to have a growth mindset to learn, but also to teach and coach. And so that's probably one of the biggest differences that we hire for, is every single person coming into the team has to have, they may not have the ability yet to do the coaching and mentoring, but they have to have the desire to. And so then when they're in together as a team, they're all coming from that perspective. So there is no arguing over who's who's the team leader, who's doing what, because they've all come from that value base. I forget who said it before, but ultimately, they don't care who's leading what. It's who's the best person to fulfil the role, to fulfil the technical challenge that they have in front of them. And then because they have this learning culture and they have this coaching and mentoring attitude, then they will all jump in and help each other as well. And so that's ultimately then how they achieve, and they're achieving quicker because they're doing it as a team. So we're very strong around that. If you don't know, ask for help. So whilst yes, they're predominantly employed by our customers as the expert, there will be things they don't know. And so rather than them try and figure that out on their own, it's very much culture that they need to come back to the team and go, who's done this before, or how can we get together and get a solution much quicker. So it's those, there's lots that I think goes into it, but that, so the technical level is the first hurdle, and then it's all those other things as the consultative style. And then from a cultural interview perspective, and we've actually increased this process, so it used to just be me at the start, and then they do the technical interview with our technical team. Now they still do an interview with me, they also do an interview with our people community person, and then they also do now an interview with our general manager. So it's quite a process around not just looking at the technical fit and that cultural aspect.
Absolutely. So they need to have those really strong technical skills, but also that growth mindset and the accountability, etc., etc. Thank you. And Michelle, sorry, you've been a bit quiet over there in the corner. So talk from a legal perspective. What would you say are the pre-employment considerations when you're assessing and selecting your team?
There's some very particular steps that a lot of people don't really turn their mind to, but I'm just going to preface it with, I've listened to what everyone said and I keep nodding my head going, yeah. And I think probably the easiest way I can explain legislation in the employment sector from my perspective is it's a codification of all those principles of trust and care and respect. Because there's been a history of people not doing that. So when it becomes very siloed, where we incentivise people by money alone, where we make things ticker box exercise, people don't work effectively together. And then you've got people looking for the out, looking for the thing that they can get over you, looking for the loopholes. And so that's how legislation forms, because we're filling those gaps. If you've got a good structure in place, you probably won't have to worry about that somewhere down the track. So a really good recruitment process is incredibly important. So first of all, if you're recruiting and you're looking at building a team, do a self-check. Make sure that you as a leader are effective, you understand your obligations, your responsibilities, you understand how you work and what skills and soft skills particularly you need to balance off the team, and learn how to take feedback effectively. Understand, I suppose, chart out, so we talked about personality tests, understand what attributes you need to build that team and then hone in on that and adopt a recruiting process that will help you to identify the performance. So if you're recruiting for people with a particular set of skills and they've all come out with the same degree, you know that they're reasonably equivalent, they've learnt the same skills, but that degree would not have taught them the people skills that are going to make them team members. So when you're recruiting, you really need to look for that when you're interviewing. I mean, I've used for the last 20 years a process, targeted selection, where we look at a performance-based 5-point star. So we talk to them, tell me about a time when you had to solve a problem in an emergency. What was it? What did you do? How did it work out? On reflection, what would you have done better? And people who are very good at talking themselves up will give you a story, but they won't be able to tell you those key points and think, yep, that's great, that's fabulous, but they haven't passed because they haven't been able to look within themselves, understand their skill set, understand where they might be a little bit short, and they haven't learnt to draw on other people. In the recruitment process, obviously from a legal perspective, you need to keep an eye out for discrimination in the way that you are recruiting. And you need to check your biases, absolutely, because the the best person for the job may not be the person you think it is. So you really do have to put the blinkers on. I talk about a story I was once told about recruiting musicians for, I think it was the Vienna Orchestra, and it had been a predominantly male orchestra, and they did a blind audition process, and it significantly increased the number of women because the people who were listening were assessing the performers while only listening to the quality of their outcome. And they ended up with a much better orchestra, and I think that applies to everything. You have to put the blinkers on and just look at the skills that you're looking for. There are some practical things like work cover in Queensland. There is a section that allows you as an employer at the pre-employment stage to ascertain if someone has a pre-existing injury or condition that would affect their inherent ability to perform their duties. So you need to have a good position description that actually addresses the needs of the job. You need to have identified any physical or psychological risks that someone would have to take into account, and give them an opportunity to read that position description and give you a fair assessment of how they sit in that. Now, if they are honest with you, that is not an automatic in that application. You have to think about what reasonable adjustments, not any adjustment, but the reasonable adjustments that could be made. Because if that person's the best person for the job, but they've got a minor issue in their background that you can deal with, then that's the best person for the job. But if they've got a serious matter that you cannot overcome, then you need to take that into consideration. If they haven't disclosed something, a pre-existing condition, and then they later on try to make a claim on that, work cover knows everything, they will stop the claim. So you need to have alerted that person at the start that if you don't disclose that to us and you later try to make a claim on that, your claim will be refused. So that's a unique opportunity that very few people know about, very few people use, and it's important that you do it at that interview stage so you can test the information. And then be open about what you're looking for, understand any requirements. So if you're covered by an award, understand what the rates are, penalty rates, classifications, progression issues, any allowances that may apply. If you're going to offer someone a salary, make sure that they meet the Better Off Overall test, because people have got caught by that at times. Make sure that your record processes are good, and do your reference checks. And don't do it as a ticker box exercise. It's not like you have this little tick sheet, go, yep. Ask meaningful questions. Ask them, would you employ this person again? What were they like working with the rest of the team? How did you feel when they resigned? And sometimes the silence speaks volume. Take that on board. It's definitely not a ticker box exercise. And I think if you can get those parts of an opportunities to contribute and to engage with you in a meaningful way, it's not a case. I've had so many employers over the years saying, well, you know, they're a professional and they should just know what to do. But they haven't worked in your big organisation before. Every organisation is different. So you need to educate them in that.
Yeah, the new boy, new girl syndrome. Yeah. And you brought up some really interesting wealth of information there, Michelle. And I love the idea, I can't remember the TV programme, you know, when they're sat in the chairs and they can't see the winner. And then you press the button and you flick round. What's it called?
The voice.
That's it, the voice. How we could bring that into an interview process. But I'm not sure if it would work. But another question I had for each of you, and just a one-word answer, because I don't want to run over time, but the reference check. I do reference checks. I always do verbal reference checks. It is quite time-consuming, and I get tempted to do the online ones. That you can. There's XREF, there's Referoo. What do you think? Just like from each of you, a yes or a no, if you were to get an online reference check. So I'll start with you, Michelle, because you're shaking your head.
No.
Faith, yes or no? No. Scott?
No, do it yourself.
Oh, fair enough.
I think they're fabulous.
So I won't sign up for that one then.
Violent agreement.
Pardon?
Give you one exception to this.
Go on then.
If you do an online reference check of the person's personality,
Ah, right.
that works surprisingly well. Get someone else to rate their personality, how they were in that previous job. And surprisingly enough, that works well.
Yeah, but not just a tick box online reference check.
I think there's been a lot of lawyers over the years that have warned people, do not give a reference,
Yeah.
but keep it very vanilla, and so you end up getting a pretty standard response. So you have to learn to read between the lines. They're worried about defamation, and it's not an issue.
Which is quite an American kind of.
I think I said before we were having a talk, way too many people watch American TV. Donald's approach is not the way to go.
Absolutely. Anyway, we won't get on to politics, but we will get on this side of the room about assessing and selecting high-performing teams. So, Jane, what do you think from a people and culture perspective? How do you assess and select?
So I think as we're learning, I would echo most of what everyone has already shared, so I won't revisit that. Aside from reinforcing, I think cultural fit, personality, complementary, interactions are critical, along with great technical expertise. The biases piece is a really interesting one. I think it's always a very easy route to take to hire like, and if I can share an anecdote, I remember back when I joined TechnologyOne, I was introduced to we have a forum where all about sales, senior leadership in sales and consulting come together, and probably 100 odd individuals in that group, and I walked in and was introduced, and it was a room not just similar to this, but a few additional folk in there, and everybody turned and looked and started clapping. Yes. And I thought, oh, that's unusual. And I lifted my head and I cast my eye around the room, and I recognised that I could not have been more of an outlier in the group that was in the room. And it became so apparent that what I saw, respectfully, was white middle-aged men from wall to wall, front to back. And I was an anomaly. And it was extraordinary, the fact that people felt compelled to start clapping. We've caught one, we've got one, finally. So, I think that, and I make light of it now, and fortunately we are starting to move the dial on that in the organisation, but it takes time. The comfort of hiring someone that looks like you and feels like you and sounds like you and has a similar CV to you can be very, very tempting, and often an easy solution in hiring decisions are difficult. So I think the sentiment was hold the mirror up and check those biases before you go down that path, because all of a sudden you've got a team of mini-me's racing around the place, which does not give you diversity in any regard, including technical diversity and thought leadership and so forth. The other piece I would add is we are in the process of introducing what we're going to call, give it something a little more fancy as time goes by, but simply a success profile. So helping people understand what TechnologyOne is and what TechnologyOne isn't. We have a challenge around retention in that 0 to 6, 0 to 12 months. So there's something not going right for us in that regard. We're very, very disciplined and overt about what the cultural attributes, the leadership attributes, the expectations around flexibility and so forth are when people join. But we expect people to choose us as much as us choosing them. So in creating a success profile, it's about go ahead and do an audit, do a self-assessment before you hit apply now or you call our head of recruitment or whatever the case may be, and really sort of sanity check, is this the right environment that you're going to thrive? We will help with that process when we get to interview, but giving people the opportunity to actually opt in or opt out based on the attributes of our organisation and specifically the attributes of the role we're seeking to recruit. So yes, there's something in putting it into the hands of the applicant and affording them the opportunity to choose us before we have the opportunity to choose them.
Yes, both parties have to be happy. It's like a marriage.
Well, to use Arthur's analogy of falling in love and being respectful and surprising and delighting each other. Oh, how gorgeous. It sounds idyllic, but it doesn't always work out that way, which is why people like Michelle help us out.
You have to have work and compromise.
Yeah, that's right.
And everything.
That's right.
And I think it's interesting that story you tell about we've snared her, we've got a female on the team. And quite often when I send a CV and I'd say, oh, she's a woman, oh, it's so exciting, we want to have a woman. But my concern sometimes about that is don't hire her because of her gender, hire her because she's extremely good, or she's the right cultural fit, or whatever, not just because of her gender.
Super important.
Yeah,
Super important.
absolutely.
And it's all, quotas and targets are always one of those controversial things. And interestingly, TechnologyOne has female representation of around 38%, which for the tech sector is quite extraordinary. And none of that is based on quotas or targets. I'm okay with targets, I'm not okay with quotas. But that female representation has happened very organically for our business, which is fantastic. Now, to be fair, it is in the mid to lower levels. We're very triangulated when it comes to that, but such a missed opportunity. So,
I think diversity is really important, and not for the sake of ticking a box.
That's right.
Again.
That's right.
And Lynne, what about?
Yeah, I'll probably go on from that theme as well as what Jane was saying. And we're quite lucky at Canstar, and it has happened organically as well. We've got a fairly 50-50 split at all levels. And it's so what I do find is that within high-performing teams, and while you do not want to choose people based on their gender, having those different sorts of thought from different genders does actually bring in different ideas. So it's I don't like quotas either. It's not something I ever would support. But if you're able to do it and have that diversity of thought within genders, it does actually bring out different ways of looking at things. The other thing that I would say about hiring, and I was talking about, say, maybe assessing people for high-performing teams rather than also hiring, and not go with the culture thing, but don't overlook people. I think sometimes we overlook people in different positions, and sometimes people would like to actually give something a go in another team or on a project. And what we've found is sometimes those people who you haven't thought of that they'd be able to sort of drive a team, and I spoke before about our saying of no tribe, no triumph. I think of one of our young people who was in our product data team, and he just had a passion for trying different things, and we actually gave him a go, and he was one of our outstanding leaders and progressed really quickly. And it was just a matter of someone backing him. So I think sometimes don't if you've got a tech project or a sales project, sometimes other people might like to be involved. So that's another form of diversity. In the hiring one of the big ones that I know we made a mistake of many years ago, you try to learn from your mistakes, I always say, don't hire for desperation. I think we may have all done that at some stage where you're desperate, you've had a couple of people leave, the team is struggling because they've got a workload that's, coming in on them. And so you'll hire the least worst, the least worst. And that never works, So while it can be painful, take your time, get the right person, make sure they're a cultural fit. Jane alluded to earlier, and the whole panel has, is, you can train for skill, you can teach skill, you can upskill people, but getting that cultural fit first is the most important thing.
So look inside the organisation. And see, because they'll have the cultural fit, and they might, and you don't know about skills that they have that could enhance another team.
Yes.
And ask the question, would they like to do that?
Yes.
And Arthur, from your perspective, let's talk about personalities. So what personalities do you think work best in high-performing teams?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick little tutorial on what personality actually is. And some of the things I'll be saying, I would guess some of even the psychologists in the room may not be aware of. In fact, I know a lot of psychologists aren't aware of some of the things I'm about to say. But one of the things right up front that they would be aware of is, first of all, when you're selecting people, when you're assessing them on personality, you're not selecting widgets. You know, none of you is a widget. One of the things about a selection process is different from selecting a widget is if I'm selecting, you're also selecting me, just like you were saying before. That the potential employee or staff member is selecting you as much as this is a two-way street. No widget selects you back. So that's one of the first things. But this creeps in really strange little ways. I'll give you an example. Hands up if you think women are better at multitasking. Okay, we've got a few hands and whatever. And the point is, I know there's a lot of other people who are thinking this is true. And the point is, no, you're wrong on two counts. Number one, no one is good at multitasking. No one. Number two, when people have done research on this, if anything, men are slightly less bad at it. But we're all pretty bad at it. So that's one. I'll give you another one. Are Chinese people better at maths? You'd be surprised how many people fall for. What? How? This just point blank racist. I've come across people that should know better coming out with that one. Another one. People with degrees are better leaders.
No.
It's actually a little bit true. It's not a lot true, it's a little bit true. But not because of the degree, it's because of a whole bunch of things that go along with the degree. On the other hand, are balding, grey-bearded men better partners?
That's a very leading question.
Of course we are. Okay. So, I'm going to tell you some things about personality, as I say, that you may not be aware of. But first of all, that personality is mostly a function of a relationship. It's less a function of you than a function of your relationships with people around you. So I'll give you some examples. Think about for yourself how you behave in the following situations. At work, at home, at a family reunion, at a funeral, at a party, at a sporting or musical event. Now, if you tell me you behave in exactly the same way across all of those, there's a word for you, it's psychotic. And I'm not making this up. Psychotic people lose touch with reality. Real people, sane people, adapt. And when you compare people's personality assessed across different situations and in different relationships, well, it varies hugely. It really genuinely does. What's more though is different things become relevant in different situations and in different relationships. You mentioned Myers-Briggs before, for example. Most people will come across the Myers-Briggs at some point of time. I love playing with the Myers-Briggs. Most people who've done it more than once know that their score kind of shifts. Myers-Briggs people will tell you that doesn't happen. It does. It absolutely does. No personality assessment is that reliable. They just aren't. I've looked through the data on this. It's just not true. What's more though is what's relevant in a different place will vary quite substantially. You will have standard personality assessments that people will use from one situation to another and say that that always works. That's a little bit like saying no one changes from occupation to occupation, and what's important in every occupation is the same. If you are going for a standard job where everybody is doing exactly what they're required to do, they have no room for manoeuvre, it's all highly procedural and whatever, use a standard personality assessment, it will help you find the right person. A more conscientious score will mean they'll be more reliable, a more agreeable score will mean they'll be more friendly. If you want someone who's outgoing, funnily enough, someone who scores more highly on extroversion will be more outgoing. These things, they do work. When you're talking standard. One of the things I've been working on over the last 10 years or so is what happens when you start asking people within a job, what's the personality that's relevant there? And we come out with very different things. So, for example, nurses. If you think Myers-Briggs, there's one of the dimensions judging versus perceiving. In more standard personality assessments, certainly on the research side, that's called conscientiousness, which is the judging end of things. Basically the same. If you talk with nurses, it's not one dimension, it's three. They split it all up. Because in that occupation, when we were doing the work with the nurses, I didn't spot this first up, and then it came to me. Why do nurses focus so much on being conscientious? So it becomes three completely different things. It's because if they don't get it right, people die. So this becomes rather important among nurses. Teachers have different personalities. They focus on different things. If you want to use personality to select for an occupation where people have high-level skills, they're making high-level decisions, using a standard personality assessment will not get you that. The way to get to that is ask the people who are doing the job. Find out what they know about each other's personality and work from that. You might be able to come up, if you're doing this on your own, you're not going to be able to come up with a nice little personality questionnaire, but you'll come up with some really good questions for your interviews. If you want to come up with a nice little personality questionnaire, that's when you talk to someone like myself about developing that for an occupation. But if it's for a specific job, and particularly if you're in a small business, make sure you talk to people who are currently doing that job.
So one size doesn't fit all with Myers-Briggs or whatever.
There's another reason, by the way, you wouldn't want to use the Myers-Briggs. It's actually not designed for assessment, for selection.
Except you should never use it for a
Yeah, absolutely shouldn't. Should you believe it? Not really. On the other hand, is it incredibly useful for team development? I would use it in a heartbeat. Yes. It's brilliant. I love it for that. I just don't believe it. So to assess and select, you need to figure out what the people in the job really need to do from a personality side of things, and find a way of assessing that, and then use that. Let them tell you how they work, and especially get them to tell you what they do that matches what you're after, or what they've done in the past. Don't let them get away with, well, if I work for you, I'm going to do this. Get them to tell you what they've done in the past. That's why it's so useful to put personality assessments as part of its reference checks. Because what you'll hear from the referee, they're not going to be thinking this is defamatory or I'm overplaying. They're just going to be, that's their personality. And they will feed you information that will be much more useful and it's based on the job. So,
I'll need to talk to you more about that after. But I'm just aware of time as well, that there's going to be opportunity for Q&A at the end, so we don't want to eat into your Q&A time, but I definitely want to talk to you about that other side of the coin now. What do we do when team members are low performing? And what I thought in terms of the questioning is maybe start with you, Arthur, more at the communication stage, and with you guys more at the team level, Faith and Scott, then more at the HR people and culture phase, and then when the old proverbial hits the fan and Michelle gets involved. So, Arthur, let's start with you. What happens when team members are low performing? What's your advice?
Well, one of the reasons why I'm so glad to have Michelle here, by God, in this situation, you really need to know what the law is, and at times she will save your life. Yeah, I'm really not overstating that. Having worked in it, thank you for being here. Okay, there are times when, hey, listen, this really isn't a performance issue. People have done something that is so bad, you just got to sack them. If you've caught them doing something criminal, if they're causing harm to somebody else, if you've caught them red-handed, actually sack them on the spot. So, just to be fair, you've caught them red-handed, get them out the door now. If it's not something like that, if it's genuinely a case of performance, the first thing you've got to do is figure out, actually, what's performance in the first place? If you don't know what good performance is, you're never going to be able to work this through effectively with someone who isn't performing well. You're going to have this vague idea that until you've got clear in your head what the good performance is, you're not going to be able to work that through. So that's the first thing. And this is a conversation you should have even before you employ them, that you've got to keep that conversation going. What's good performance? And to then start talking with people about what good performance is. Those four that I was talking about beforehand are all things you might want to include in those conversations about what are your targets, what are the resources, have you got adequate resources to perform, are you paying attention to the consequences, the feedback and so on, are you learning from this? This is part of your learning process. We've got a problem, we've got to get you through this. One of the things that people overlook when they're dealing with a poor performance issue is you are not just dealing with that poor performer. You are dealing with your whole organisation. If you have a poor performer and you treat them unfairly, goodbye psychological safety. Worse than that, people will start thinking, I'm working for an arsehole organisation. If you've worked for one, you will know how you made that organisation pay. If you do not treat people fairly, as in you are upfront, clear about what's required, and you talk through and work this towards building them up to being a productive member of staff, you will have staff sitting around you thinking, they're being unfair, they're going to be unfair to me, I've got to cover my back. And if you don't think that they will do this, that's because they're hiding it from you already. It's as blunt as that. On the other hand, if you don't have those conversations with someone who's not performing well, they're going to know that as well. And what message they'll get from that is you don't care. You have to have these tough conversations in as fair a way as possible, trying to understand the other person's point of view, working through each of those things like their targets, have they got adequate resources, what are the measures, what can they do to bring it up. If you go through this process, sometimes you're going to be going through this process 2 times and then maybe going, you know what, this ain't getting better. We're going to be saying goodbye. And that sounds like a really harsh thing to do. It's not. Often what that means is you're giving someone a very clear message that they are in the wrong job. And they mightn't thank you for it at the time. Long term, you're giving them a very clear message. Career change around about now would be a good idea. But you are also giving that very clear message to the rest of your staff that, hey, there are boundaries, there are real limits, and I am enforcing those, but I'm going to do that fairly, respectfully, with an aim to make people productive rather than show how big and mean and hairy I am. So,
be cruel to be kind, kind of thing at the end.
It's not so much be cruel to be kind.
Not cruel, but
be honest to be kind.
be honest to be kind.
Yeah, I don't believe in being cruel to be kind. That's just
Sorry.
the line the bullies come out.
That's kind of 100 years ago kind of attitude.
Yeah. Be honest to be kind.
Thank you, Arthur. And Dave, let's move on to you. I'd love as well anyone that wants to bring in some case studies of turning around low performers. But with your experience, what have you done to turn low performers around, and have you had success there?
So I think giving direct feedback in the moment. So often, people wait till a problem at a time. So that's something that both myself but also our team are taught to give feedback in the moment. So again, if you've got a high-performing team and they're operating as that, then they're quite comfortable giving feedback to each other. So it is often rare to get someone that's low performing if you have that. But it does happen at times. A lot of the times where I've seen low performance in, I guess, most of the organisations that I've worked for, it's been predominantly when someone wants to go for a promotion. And the issues become around promotion less so than the job they're doing at the time. And so part of the process that I have at SixPivot and I've had in some of my other organisations is that we enable people to step up into that next level, and they have to operate at that next level within bounds and that they're safe and that there's other people that are supporting them. But it becomes when they actually can't do that next step. And then they start to not take feedback well. And so I've got a number of case studies I could give you around this. And then it is that conversation of, I understand you want to progress and I understand this is what you want to do. However, you are not at this level and this is why, and these are the things we can do to support you. Some people just will not accept that. And so again, if you've given the feedback all the way along, there's no surprises as to why what they need to do. But then it does often become the conversation of maybe this is not the best place for you to achieve that. So, we've tried to support you, we've done things that we can do. So maybe this just isn't the best environment. So it doesn't mean, and often then we're working with them to get them into another role. And maybe they'll be more successful because that team's different or that environment's different or it's a different pressure. So I think often, that is our approach, is if for whatever reason someone's not performing, they generally self-select out if you've handled it well, if you've given the feedback along the way. I've had people come to me and go, I don't think I can do my best work here, not SixPivot, but previously. And so then it's helping them actually find a place they can do their best work. So I find if you're upfront, you're honest, and you're giving feedback in a timely manner, and not waiting for performance reviews, and not trying to avoid the tough conversations, if you're consistently having those with them, people will start to self-select out, and then it's how do you move from that.
Absolutely. And you've made me think, actually, an example, Russell Badcock was supposed to be here, but he's really poor. He's got a really bad cold at the moment, but he would give a really good example of how people are wanting that promotion, but they don't get it for whatever reason, and what was a previously really good performer, their nose is out of joint, and then it goes the other way, and then they kind of self-select themselves out as well. And it's quite difficult to turn that. And Scott, what about you? Any low performers? Have you turned them around? What would your advice be?
If I think back, I've certainly had a number of situations that I've had to deal with. To me, working with other leaders and managing those teams, it really is about understanding root cause, what is the cultural factors that are contributing to that person's low performance. And you can see that through, I've used for many years a thing called team temperature. It's a way that team members are able to assess what they think the temperature is. Is the temperature running really well? Is it running cold? And it's completely anonymous, and you can collate that information on a weekly or at the end of each sprint, etc. And then you can see if things are going, if the performance is starting to drop, and if the team is recognising that. So using those tools is very, very important. But ultimately, there's a reason that person was selected for the team in the first place. So if they're not performing well, then it's really important having those meaningful conversations with them and understanding, well, is it, it might be something external, for example. It may be that just something, the dynamics of the team have changed, they're just not working well. I've been able to turn many of those situations around simply by placing them into another team. Quite often it is a personality clash, it's a change in culture. within the team dynamics that is sometimes causing the problem. As a very last resort, obviously there are mechanisms in place in any organisation where you start to formalise the process. I try to avoid that at all costs. In fact, I can honestly say I probably only had to use that maybe a couple of times throughout my whole career. And I've had to deal with a number of incidents involving poor performers and being able to successfully turn those around. And that's ultimately, I think, what good leadership is about, is working with your managers, working with team members, and not finding the right solutions to each problem.
Thank you. And team temperature, is that what it's called?
Team temperature, yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
It's fantastic, very powerful.
And what are is it like 5 key questions?
No, it's simply how are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being outstanding, 0 being very low. And then provide one word on what best explains why you feel the way you are.
That's perfect. So it's like 30 seconds
Oh,
of that
absolutely.
time. It's not, oh gosh, we've got to fill this.
And then what you do is you monitor it. You actually have it on, you can have it on your agile boards, for example, and you can say, like, this week the team temperature is this. And so each leader then, if it's starting to drop, they're accountable for understanding what is causing that. And talking to the individuals and saying, I've noticed our team temperature is dropping. What do you think? Can you tell me what you think is causing it? So investigating and finding what the root causes are.
I love the simplicity.
Yeah,
That's
very
fantastic. Everyone will probably pitch that idea,
One
I
of the
think.
tech leaders that I used to have, he did similar, except he just had smiley faces.
Yes.
So each day when you came to your desk, you had a smiley face with a sad face, so you knew.
But it's making you aware and what have you, and it's, as I say, it's simple. There's no fuss and everything. And ladies over there, people and culture, what do you do? Let's start with you, Jane, with regards to low performing team members.
So again, all of the above,
Yeah.
the other panellists. So I guess what we would typically do is try to understand what the root cause is. I think Scott used that language earlier. So diagnosing the deficiency, and to go back to my simple language of, attitude versus capability. Is it the skill or the will? Is the person ill-equipped, particularly if it's been a promotion? Do they not have the right capability or skill set to be successful in role? Or is it attitude? Do they have the will to be successful? Is the mindset presenting in the right way to be successful? So diagnosing, is it the behaviours, is it the result? I think, again, just-in-time feedback is super critical. Nipping it in the bud, calling it when you see it, not waiting till a performance review or the next one-on-one or the next check-in opportunity. Doing it in the moment so that it's fresh and raw and can be discussed openly. I guess a bit on the how, using I statements. I try to always coach leaders and team members alike to use I statements rather than you statements. I've noticed, I've observed, it seems like, versus you're doing such and such, you're not doing such and such, why aren't you delivering X, Y, and Z? So again, subtle but really, really important in I guess, it not coming across as an ambush and not creating an inflammatory environment or an accusatory environment to have those sometimes difficult conversations. Then from a process perspective, we would typically look at the opportunity to improve. So we will always go down the performance improvement route first, whether that is about attitude or skills. Do we need to give you more development, more skills to help you be successful? Or do you need some coaching support around your attitude and your mindset to help you be successful in role? If that doesn't work, then it goes from performance improvement opportunities and inviting that person to do better to us taking ownership of the process and managing the performance quite discreetly and directly. We have actually just undertaken a really significant review of all of this this type of work on the back of some pretty hairy people management, performance management matters that some of you may or may not be aware of. So it's important stuff, and it can go really, really pear-shaped when you get it wrong. So again, I think it's a two-way street as well. Someone used the word of doing it respectfully. My last dot point is about respect and relief of all things. Often in putting someone out of their misery, they're not performing, they're not equipped to do it, they don't want to be there, they're there for the wrong reasons. It is such a relief to them when you sit them down and say, hey, don't think this is working, we've talked about your attitude, we've talked about your performance, we've done all we can to help you be successful. It's probably time to transition. And typically the relief that comes with that can be quite powerful. So I guess it's also about not underestimating the impact of having those courageous conversations with people and helping them see the light as much as removing someone that's not getting to end of job the way you need them to.
For the individual, for the team as a whole, and
Correct.
the leader
Correct.
leading that particular team. And Lynne, do you have anything to add particularly?
Well, probably. Seem like Jane and I have conferred all day on because I was just alluding. Because one of the examples that I had was around, I was thinking about when you were saying about a case study when we were talking during the week, and one of the people that I saw turn around was a person who was performing, and then all of a sudden started, his performance was dropping off. And so I had that conversation with him about it, and there was absolute relief. He was so glad that someone had asked him because he was struggling and he didn't want to ask, and he had personal issues going on as well, which was impacting on his ability to do his job. But he was too timid and it's probably from the organisation, I would say, on our behalf, he didn't feel that he was comfortable enough to come and speak to someone. So when we did actually speak to him, he had such relief that he felt, and we were able to turn him around because then we sort of got to the bottom of what was actually going on and gave him some then very concrete goals to achieve, once again making them achievable. And then we sort of just worked our way through until he was able to get back onto the performance path that he needed to be on. So, and that is actually a really good feeling, because very often it doesn't turn around. All too often it doesn't turn around. So experiencing that is really, it's a nice feeling. And but apart from that, everything that Jane and the rest of the panel has said, get on it early. When you see it, have those difficult conversations. All too often I find that managers don't, and they let it pass because they just don't want to be uncomfortable. Jump on it quickly, because then it won't escalate and become a performance management issue rather than, a performance improvement issue.
It's a great story, and great to hear that they turned around.
Yes.
And what have you. And Michelle, over to you.
Yes.
So, what, from a legal perspective, what legal considerations should you bear in mind if somebody is low performing?
Everyone has touched on some really important points that sometimes we think are HR warm and fuzzy, but they're not. They're based in the law. So the first step I always recommend for people is have a care-based conversation. Find out if there is something going on, particularly because employers now have obligations around bullying and harassment and domestic violence. You don't want to be on the other end of an accusation of discrimination because someone has disclosed something. And you have to understand that all human beings will struggle with certain things in their lives. So if you've got a worker who is going to contain these issues, like nobody's going to come to work and tell you I'm being beaten by my partner. But it will have a huge effect on their work, and it will have a huge effect on the way they relate to other people. And they don't know where to go to help, for help, and they don't see a way out of it, so it changes their personality. So often a care-based conversation and a referral to employee assistance programs if someone discloses is a really important step. And if someone says to you, I'm being bullied, or I'm being harassed, or I'm being, I am being beaten by my partner, or subject to domestic violence, then you've got to stop that process, that performance process, and put some supports in place to help them deal with that issue. And that does an enormous amount to build their confidence, to deal with the situation, their loyalty to your organisation. It helps you to understand how to manage your obligations. Then you have other situations. I'll talk about what Arthur mentioned before, because that's absolutely true, and people get this wrong all the time. Serious misconduct. And I've actually pulled the definition up so I can explain it. So serious misconduct involves an employee deliberately behaving in a way that is inconsistent with continuing their employment. Examples include causing serious and imminent risk to the health and safety of another person, or to the reputation or profits of their employer's business. Theft, fraud, assault, or refusing to carry out a lawful and reasonable instruction that is part of the job. Okay. So there is a little bit of a grey line, a fuzzy line between serious misconduct and misconduct. So it is important to get it right. But if someone has done something so serious, so we've discovered fraud or they have punched somebody, it is out the door straight away. Because I had a situation once with a small business owner who rang me and said, I've got this young chap and I want to get rid of him. And when I had a look at the contract, he's past his minimum employment period. Bugger, I have to performance manage him and I don't really want to. I said, well, I'm really, really sorry, but you're going to have to. Tell me about what's been going on. He's just not on top of his work. I can't rely on him to do the jobs that I need him to do. And we had this awful incident a couple of weeks ago. Part of his job was to do the banking news in a regional area. And he decided he took the bag of cash with quite a bit in it, threw it under the front seat of his car, ran some other errands, forgot to go to the bank. Nobody picked it up until 3 weeks later when somebody was checking the bank reconciliation. I said, what do we do? I said, well, put the phone down, go and ask him, has he checked under his seat? Have you actually talked to him? Oh, we haven't talked to him, we didn't know what to do. So, well, you missed your opportunity for serious misconduct straight away. So the key was they were not checking in with him. They were not following up on things. So they didn't say, hey, did you do the banking or have you got the receipts from the bank? They waited until the statement came. They were scared to death because his father was a very senior legal professional, so they assumed that hell would come firing down on them if they dismissed this young chap. But as I was talking to them about the relationship, they hadn't done all of the key things on their side. So he understood what was required. He didn't have a job description, they didn't talk to him regularly, and coach and mentor and encourage and correct. And so they had to do the performance improvement plan. And I drafted it for them and I talked them through how to do it. And here are all the stages and these are the conversations you have to have. And he needs to acknowledge where he's done well and say, well, we're not going to talk about this again unless it falls backwards, but we're going to look at the next thing. So over a 6-week period, we assessed his conduct. And at the end of 6 weeks, he was perfect.
Oh, what a fabulous story!
But
did they find the money?
They were annoyed. They rang me and said, he damn well passed it. Now what do I do? I said, well, rejoice in the fact that you've turned someone around, congratulate yourself, and enjoy. Yeah, they were so hell-bent on getting him out, but they never looked at themselves and their processes to see if they were doing the right things with him. So we went from a situation where it technically should have been serious misconduct, but they didn't act on it, and this is one of the keys. If you don't act on it straight away, then you are telling everybody that it's not serious misconduct. So you lose that right. So you have to act on the right quickly. You have to go through the processes, not because there's a ticker box sheet that says you have to, but because you're going to have to prove to the Fair Work Commission or the federal court, if the matter goes to a hearing, that you did all reasonable things to manage the relationship effectively, and despite all your best efforts, you couldn't get an improvement. And you need to think a little bit laterally about what you do with these people. What was it that made them so wonderful when they started? What have we done to them in the meantime? And is the place they're in the right place for them? Have they outgrown us? So there's a lot of investigation that has to be had. So I always say seek advice before you terminate someone's employment. Don't wait until the documents come from the court, because it's all too late at that point. There's been a lot of talk when I've been looking at these concepts of performance management about not doing performance reviews. So the current thought is don't do an annual performance review, because people have gotten the habit of just once a year having a talk with someone. They turn it into a ticker box. They go, yep, that was all okay, because they haven't actually engaged in the process. So what's really recommended, certainly from a legal perspective, is regular follow-ups, regular conversations, seek feedback. And that's how you're going to keep your finger on the pulse, understand what's happening, and fix it before it becomes a problem. Because nobody sets out, no one gets up in the morning with the view of, I'm going to go to work and do a really shit job. We do things to them to facilitate that. So that might be that they're being bullied by a co-worker and we're turning a blind eye to it. And you can't do that anymore. There are a lot of organisational reasons why you won't, but now there are workplace health and safety requirements. From a lawyer's perspective, with the industrial manslaughter laws in Queensland, we are just waiting for a prosecution for psychological injury. Someone committing suicide because of the serious outcomes in the workplace. We know it's going to happen one day.
Wow. That's quite an ending there. But on a more cheery note, it seems that it's that communication, that regular, that open, that honest communication that's really, really important. Now we've got one last topic to discuss, which is about competing and attaining your top talent. I'm just checking in with Cawley on time. What are we like?
I think if we just do this super quickly, maybe like the top 2 or 3 tips,
Okay.
and then we will move to questions.
Have you got questions? Put your hand up if you've got a question so we can gauge. Perfect. Lovely. So I'm going to start like that. Start with you, Jane. How do you, it's a rapid snapshot, how do you compete for and retain your top performers?
So I'm going to narrow it right down. When I joined TechnologyOne, it became very apparent to me that people joined for a job rather than a career. And over time, we have heard loud and clear messages from our people that a career is critically important. So making sure we really address the non-financial retention opportunities and customise opportunities for people to find their own career path in our business. We've just built an internal career framework so that people can see what's possible, whether it's horizontal, lateral or vertical. Cross-functional moves valued equally to progression opportunities. Investing in career paths, helping people appreciate that there are possibilities to progress if that's what they want. And I guess the other is, the non-financial side of things. Not everyone is excited by money. People, obviously, it seems to be the first place people go to retain individuals, but that's not always the deal breaker for people who are moving. So talking to people about what's most important. I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. Lynne, how do you compete and retain?
I'm probably not going to talk about compete. The tech market at the moment is very hot, and it's very hard to compete at the moment. One thing, retaining your top performers, talk to them. Find out what motivates them. Different people are motivated by different things, and particularly, we're talking in the tech space. I've seen the mistake where people will, acknowledge people who've performed well and stand them up in front of an audience like this, and they're an introverted tech person who cannot stand to have the public spotlight. So you're not going to retain people like that. I actually had one person who said to me, if you get me up in front of everyone, I'm going to leave. He'd done such a good job, he delivered one of our top projects, but he just said, if you do that to me, I will leave. So talk to your team members, particularly your high performers, find out what motivates them and keep doing it.
Absolutely. Arthur?
One of the things, just following on from that, is you've got to keep them aligned and you aligned with what's important on both sides. So that what they think's important, what you think's important about the work, about the projects, about achievement, their growth, their paths, that's one part of it. The other thing is to do with money. You've got to do, particularly with retention, do your best to keep money off the table. in the sense of you don't want people starting to think, I could do so much better down the way. You need to keep their salaries well enough within the marketplace that they're not thinking about the money. Because as soon as they start thinking about the money, that is going to accrue a whole bunch of things, including having them think about when they can move on. If you start competing just on money, just think about what happens for businesses that compete on price. They basically cavitate. Either they're the bottom dwellers or they cavitate in terms of their area. If you're competing on value, in terms of I'm getting a lot of value in terms, I am just feeling so good about turning up and the people I'm working with, and I'm doing something meaningful, and I'm not having to think about the money, then you're going to keep them.
That's a really good point. And when I talk to candidates about why are you leaving, why are you considering leaving your current role, money is rarely, I want a little bit of an increase, or they'll accept the same, or in some instances they'll accept less. But money is rarely the primary motivator, I find. But also
at the bottom level, when you are just struggling to get money to pay your rent and whatever, money's a high motivator. Anything past that, not so much.
Yeah, when you're 22, yes, but as careers progress, it seems less so. And also tailoring it to the individual rather than having one size fits all. Retain and compete your tech talents. So I'm going to talk to you first, Scott.
Okay. I mean, from my perspective, working in the public sector, one of the confronting things I had to deal with was the fact that I couldn't trade money. Coming from the resources sector, there was always money available, so it meant that I had to work incredibly hard, not just to attract, but also to bring good talent in. I take it very personally, so when I'm involved in building my teams, I make a lot of personal commitments about how I can help them in progressing their careers. And it's not just about making the promises, but it's also about following through those promises. Because if you make all these promises and then you attract somebody in and bring them in and then you don't follow through, they will leave very, very quickly. Your trust will be gone. So I make a personal commitment and I always follow through, and I've had enormous success in bringing people in where they've actually dropped the salaries that they were originally on, and then come to work with me and they've done incredibly well.
That's interesting as well, because one of the other reasons that people might be leaving their role is I was promised the earth and I was given an atlas kind of approach, and it is quite often that the promises haven't been delivered. And Faith, how do you compete? How do you retain?
So our compete before COVID, our big thing was that as a professional services consultancy, it was you could work from anywhere. So whether that was at home, whether it's at the bus stop, whatever you want to do, you could literally work from anywhere, and exceptionally high flexibility. And so a lot of companies talk about flexibility, but ours is literally, you've got roughly 40 hours a week. You work out how you do that, even though you're consulting as a consultant with a customer. What that meant from our end, from a sales perspective, was actually getting our customers to buy into that. So, and again, if our customers then started to not honour that, we would go and have a hard conversation with the customer. Our staff still maintained what they did because they're the promises that I made to them. So, and we're still quite different in that, even though COVID's changed, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future. We are very, deliberate about one of our core values is how do we make the best environment for particularly our developers. So we're constantly looking at how do we push the envelope. So is that, can we do 4 days a week as a consultancy, which is really hard, we're building our layouts. So we're constantly pushing the envelope to say, what's next, what's different, what can we do, rather than just sitting back and going, okay, well, we're pretty good, we're just leaving like that. The big thing to Arthur's point, love. our team, you literally have to fall in love with each other almost when when you come on board, you don't come to work with us because you want a job. So, you know, we pay market rates or above in terms of salary, so salaries, you know, generally off the table from that perspective. But it's all the other things that the team brings. They want to work with smart people, so they know that because they've had to go through the process they've had to go through, the people they're coming to work with are like-minded, they've, you know, got the same capability, they can learn from others. So that we do find one of our big differentiators and people really wanting to join us is because they want that opportunity to learn from other really smart people. And again, in consultancies, often you put out with customers, and no discredit to them, but often they're not, you know, at that same level, which is why you're in there as a consultancy. So then, you know, it's often that, well, we came to work with really smart people and now we're just working with a team of, you know, average developers. So we've created teams within our teams, and when we go to customers, it's not just one person working there, it's not staff augmentation, they're actually working as a team to deliver something, and that's very outcome driven. So they're huge factors. The other is radical transparency. So I'm extremely transparent, whether it's with the figures, whether it's how the company's performing, we're having issues in the company, and the same with our clients as well. So we're extremely transparent in what we're delivering, how we're delivering these issues, and so the team has kind of bought into that as well, and that if you start to take any level of that transparency away, it becomes a huge issue. And even the company I mentioned before, where we grew up from kind of 15 to 200, one of the biggest respect pieces that they had was that transparency. And as we grew, there were things then that we started to not tell the team that we normally would at scale, and it would constantly come back, well, you're not being transparent. So that, you know, so you've got to be careful what you set up, and stick to what you promise. So yeah, they're probably, there's a lot of others on the street, but they're probably the main.
And that's quite interesting on the transparency piece. So it's easier being transparent with 50 people, but do you find it becomes more difficult at 200 plus people?
I think as you scale and depending on the growth of the business and some of the dynamics in it, there are things then that you'd openly just go, oh yeah, this is how we're at. Or if we had a performance issue, it'd be the whole team would get involved in trying to lift that person up and how do we, you know, make sure that they can grow and all those things. So as you grow to a certain level, then everyone's not as involved. And not everybody can know some of those conversations. And so that does change as companies scale. And so that's a hard thing to continue to deliver on that promise, and then still, there's certain things, and whether it's from a legal perspective, as you know, which does kind of change as you start to get.
Yeah, I've helped grow a lot of companies to that 50 stage and then to the next stage, and it's quite ubiquitous both in Australia and in the UK that those kind of issues would happen at that scaling period. And then, Michelle, what about from a policies and procedures perspective? How would you recommend that you retain your top talents?
I think if you've set out strategically to develop a good employment structure, you've done the hard work. So when you're planning the early stages of business, understanding the vision of the business, the values, and what are the tools that are going to support that, is going to allow for longevity. Understanding your rights and obligations as an employer is really important, not from the big stick approach, but just so you understand what they are. Because I've had employers at times say, oh, well, we offer flexibility, but really what they're doing is just meeting the bare minimum that the legislation allows for. And they want to sell that as a big bells and whistles opportunity. No, you're just doing what you have to do there. So don't oversell yourself. You have to understand what you're dealing with and highlight the big wins, but understand what they are. Have your policies, procedures, employment contracts professionally drafted. Do not buy off-the-peg template documents from a HR company because there is no one-size-fits-all. So a really important thing is to make sure that the policies you put in place are legally accurate, but they reflect the standards of your organisation and support the mission and value. and identify early what are going to be your important policies. Because what I find is that they just kind of develop organically along the way, usually to stop gaps. They become very disjointed and confusing. They don't get updated. Often people don't train their staff regularly in them, and so they become completely ineffective. I've also often come across situations where people either don't have a contract or just have a template contract, and it's missed all the really important things that they needed to put in place to define the relationship. And the really big important one is a code of conduct, because that is in fact the document that fills the gaps in between the legislation and your employment contract, and it sets the standards for your organisation.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Michelle. So, we did go into over time, Holly. Apologies for that. But we have still got some time for some Q&A. So, I can see you in the front there, eager. What question would you like to ask? What's your name? What's your question?
Thank you, Rob. It's really interesting to get perspective from HR, psychology, and not the legal perspective, which we always have to come back to. They actually picked up on 3 things that have been said tonight, and they could be one-word answers, but just interested. What percentage do you look at when employing for a high-performing team between cultural fit and technical expertise?
47.
It was interesting when we were talking about diversity. There was only one person on the whole panel that went beyond gender. Thank you. And we spoke about cold as well. And the third one, I don't remember what it was. That'll do.
Pardon?
That'll do.
Okay.
People can. So, perspective of diversity. When you're looking for diversity in a team, are you only looking for gender diversity, or are you looking for a lot broader perspective from gender diversity? And the notion of cultural fit to technical expertise.
I want to jump in on the diversity one right up front. Diversity. One of the things I have in my background is I am the first male equal opportunity officer in Queensland for Queensland public sector, because at the time, up until I got appointed, there had been none, and everybody else was a female. There was something about that has informed me. One of the things that you reminded me of was, even back then, that diversity is an outcome of doing things right on the way in. Got to have those measures, not as a quota, because that's actually going to cruel the whole system. But if you aren't employing people who come from an Aboriginal background, or people with a disability, or if you've got a big enough organisation and this ain't happening, what are you doing wrong? You're missing out on really good people. And that was one of the things that, for me, was one of my biggest selling points within my organisation. Wasn't about, oh, the poor girls haven't been getting a good enough time here. It was, you're missing out on talent. You're missing out on some really good people. And I was able to run the numbers on how much difference it was making in terms of, because you were counting out, because at that point, this organisation I was working with, pretty much no females, nobody from non-English speaking background, I was one of the few, et cetera, they had restricted the number of people they were selecting from to around about a third of the population. that's basically throwing out 2/3 of the talent. Once I read the numbers, they just went, ouch. That's what got them around.
And also, Arthur, don't you think when coming back to the customer perspective, all the customers aren't white males aged 25 to 35. They're a diverse range of people. So you need that diverse range of thought as well.
And I think it's diversity of thought is what you're after.
Yeah.
And, you know, by having different people from different experiences, that's where you're going to get diversity of thought.
Absolutely. But anyone else want to add a comment?
Yeah, I was going to add on to that too. The value of encouraging challenges, encouraging people to challenge the status quo, challenge the position. Yeah, we're seeing a shift. Historically, it was about the loudest voice in the room. We missed a lot of really important content, and I think everyone's had a story of delivering a project that failed because they didn't get the perspective of everybody that was available. So it's really important to have young, old, different cultures, different genders, different sexual orientation, because that's your microcosm of your customer base.
Mm-hmm.
And you need that feedback, but you have to encourage them. So there's always been a lot of focus on making people fit the mould. And you really need to break the mould and value the differences so you can develop broader products and services that meet society, because not everybody fits the mould. And one of the other things in terms of progression, the 20-year-old is going to have a very different perspective than the 35-year-old who's maybe just got married, mortgage, and 45 they've got some kids, and 50 they're starting to think about travelling because they've got rid of the kids, and 60 we're thinking about retirement. So the perspectives on life are different and the needs are different, and we need some flexibility and understanding in respect of those stages of life as well to make the team successful.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Percentages.
Percentages, sorry.
I'd still,
well picked up there,
while I
Michelle.
wouldn't have a number, I would still go higher on the culture than on the skills. I think you can always train skills, but if you don't get that cultural fit,
I'm a trainer, so
yes.
that was what I was interested in.
Yeah, I would second that. I think that, again, going back to the mindset over the skill set, but the right attitude that slots into the culture, within a couple of standard deviations of what you need it to, then the skill set can be taught or learned.
You guys?
Absolutely.
I'm probably the outlier. So for me, they've both got to be the nature of the work we do. If we don't have that technical skill first, and then equally though, because it's consulting, there's so many soft skills that we have to have. If you're talking in product companies, so also product companies, very different metrics and things that we look for in someone to what we do in consulting.
That's cloud control. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Anyone else got a question?
My name is Cowan. So I just want to quickly ask, you sort of talk about the technical skills can be taught, and I sort of got the implication that the personality is so rigid it can't be changed. Is that so? Or if it's not, can the organization shape the personality of individuals to bring up the performance?
This is your
Yeah.
domain.
Did you notice my response just then?
Yeah, we've jumped down.
Right. People change their personality from situation to situation, but also people over time change their personality in a whole bunch of ways. One of the things, someone who's been through a crisis, for example, will go through a major personality change. And this is just on the standard personality assessments. If another example, some mates of mine did some work on this. How much does personality change when people go through psychotherapy? A lot. People's personality changes in a whole bunch of ways. It doesn't change quickly because personality is effectively your average. You don't shift an average quickly. But you do shift it over time by changing one habit and then another habit and then another habit. That's how you shift a personality. I do not act the way that I did when I was 20 because I've learnt an awful lot. And that has shifted me. And this, I guarantee there are people in this room who are going, yeah, that's me. Some people in the room go, nah, I'm exactly that person I was when I was 20. And it may well be. And good luck to them. Can you change it? Yes. Can you change it as an employer? What you can change is those habits and behaviours, etc., that people exhibit at work. Focusing on those and getting them focused on, these are the values we want you to work by, these are the behaviours we want you to exhibit. People who want to work with you will change to match you. It's actually one of the things people do. It's one of our superpowers. We will match up with other people.
Thank you, Arthur. I think that answers the question. I don't think anyone's really the same as they were when they were 20, because your life experiences change you, but you've got the underlying personality that's still kind of there as well.
I've come across some people who seemed incredibly stable over time. Seem to be two groups, people who, hey, it's just really working for them, it's following through, and other people are going, learning that the world is going to stay with me. Right? They're actually just trying to shut off the world. So there are some people who are just lucky. There are some people who are just avoided. The rest of us can learn.
You sounded like some kind of supervillain when you did that. Any other questions?
Just one question. Hi, I'm Richard. One of the questions that I see is talking about poor performance. I think one of the biggest mistakes we've all made, I've made as a leader myself, is that the first thing you're looking at someone as a poor performer. Look at yourself. Are you part of that problem? Honestly. I've worked with people. One guy was a poor performer, I thought. One was a great performer. He knew the guy who was a great performer, he did what I wanted him to do. He made me look good, feel good about myself. And you fall for that. Another guy who wasn't a great communicator, whatever, and I thought, he's no good, he's a problem. And the guy got promoted, they'll probably promote the wrong guy. But if I looked at myself, you could see the fact that this guy just wasn't given the right opportunities. I, as a leader, had failed him. And therefore the problem wasn't with him as much as it was with me. The right leader's come in, he's got the right training, and he's blossomed. He's a very good person. And that was just because you were assessing somebody at your own fault. And you were looking for someone to blame for that. I hope I'm clear with what I'm trying to say there.
Like looking in the mirror.
Yeah, look at your mirror first to say, okay, often we're told you've got to pick the top performer, the low performer, grow or go type cultures that we've all had in the past. And say, okay, who is it? These guys, they will wait, maybe get on with them. The boys club goes up and, oh, sorry, you don't fit in, you've got to go. And often you let the best person go. You see him go to another organisation and blooms and blossoms.
And that brings in so many different, looking in the mirror, the bias, also the diversity.
That's right, yes.
Because you obviously like that guy.
You like what you like.
Does he like you?
And one thing I'm talking about, you talked about the corporate culture. The corporate culture could be the boys club. And that really stops you from having a diverse group. A diverse person will come to that group and it won't fit into the culture. He won't want to go to the football, he won't want to go to the pub drinking, or she won't want to do that. And that causes problems as well. So you've got to look at your corporate culture. Your corporate culture may be the reason you're not growing.
Can I make a comment about this concept of corporate culture as well? When we talk about those social activities, that's not really what corporate culture should be, but it's what it's been made into. Because if you are observing all of your obligations, requirements as an employer, you're not discriminating, then before you launch into some of those activities, you will stop to think about diversity issues, and is this what's going to appeal to everybody, and what ways can we bring everybody together? A corporate culture should be about the visions and values for the business that you established at the very beginning because you knew where you wanted to take that business, and then you've developed a set of tools that will help you to inspire people to achieve those outcomes. And it's probably more going to be about care and respect and setting up tasks for yourself. But as a leader, teaching yourself to be brave and uncomfortable by inviting people to challenge you and living with that and taking that feedback on board and going to the least obvious person for the feedback rather than the person you feel most comfortable with. So it's about retraining yourself. And in that process, a lot of the legal issues start to fall away because you've gotten rid of all those barriers that have created the legislation.
I'll challenge, yeah, I agree with you, but I'd like to challenge you a little bit on that. You look at the great companies today, you look at the Googles, you look at the Facebooks, there's nobody of age working for them. They have ageism as a problem in their companies. They will say they don't, but they do.
Yeah.
They do not hire anyone much older than 40. You look at other companies, and through their own corporate culture, they think if you're over 40, you don't know how to sit on a beanbag, you can't look for you can't, have a boss that's younger than you. That is totally wrong. And these guys are missing that boat too. So the corporate cultures themselves can be a problem to hiring the best diverse talent.
So this is where legal issues come into play though, because there's this, when we talk about discrimination, we talk about the inherent requirements of the job. Mm-hmm. So you've got, before you start putting
I can sit on the beanbag.
Before we start to impose that standard as an employer, you've got to think, is this an inherent requirement of the job? Mm-hmm. And if it's not, then we can't we have to be really conscious of not making people feel uncomfortable.
But you can't get past HR because they have this vetting process that you don't even get an interview.
Actually, and like I'm saying that, it's one of the things I've had a discussion just this week about looking in different pools for people to hire, because what I think you need is that diversity, as we were talking about, and it is age diversity as well, is good. Because at the moment, we've got a lot of, within the tech space, we've got a lot of young people coming in our front-end tech space. And what I'd like to do is actually get some more diversity in there, some thought, because I've also then got people who are looking for that next challenge sort of straight away. So within a year, want to move on. We've got, I don't know if you realise, but in Australia and in Brisbane, the tenure in tech is 1.1 years, the average tenure at the moment. So when you're hiring and then after a year and you're upskilling people after a year, it's it's very hard to keep that going. So one of the things is, when you build a good culture, you also want to be able to share that culture with different people that will suit different people's lifestyles. So I think there is something in, trying to find different pools of people rather than always looking at the same kid that can sit on the beanbag,
I think too, the concept of high-performing team, what's the period of measurement? Is it an all day, every day? Because human beings can't perform at 100% all day, every day. So we have to exercise a bit of discretion in that. And we look at I'll talk from a retail perspective because that's my background. I worked for Bunnings for many, many, many years, and they're very good at diversity. And we consciously set out to employ, kids that have just gotten old enough to get a job, to train them up, because we know that that's our best place to get long-term employees. They develop an attachment. And in fact, the Bunnings strategy of the playground and the little trolleys and the cafe, that's about customers for life. Because if you bring a small child up, pushing a trolley around Bunnings, they will still be with you when they're 7 years old. And that's a very conscious strategy, and it's also a conscious strategy of their recruiting. And there are people who I recruited as 16-year-olds who are now, quite high-level managers in the Bunnings business over 20 years later, because they found their niche and they found a place where they were included and respected and they learned something. And the reason they learned something is because we have older people as well. So Bunnings is very good at going out and finding older trainees who just can't work the tools anymore. They're shocking sometimes at customer service. They're really good at teaching the young people something. And if you walk into a tool shop now, you'll find as many women working in there as men, and you'll find a diversity of age, because one of the things we learned, I used to run the tool shops for the state, and one of the things we established is even men find it quite confronting to talk about power tools. Because if you come from a background where you are not familiar with them, the last thing you want is a trainee talking to you about RPMs and talk, and you're like, I have no idea. And I've had very intelligent, well-educated men come in and kind of talk to me in the tool shop who just want a drill. And that was part of our customer service training. We taught our staff, people that come in for a drill, they come in to buy a hole in the wall, and your job is to find out what that hole is and where it's going to go and how capable that person is at creating that hole. And if that person walks out with only a drill, you failed miserably, because they can't go home and use that unless they've got the drill bits and other bits of equipment to do the job.
That wallpaper, that.
Same as paint. If someone comes in and buys a tin of white paint, you failed. Because that's not an expression of their lifestyle. And painting a house is a very personal expression of yourself. So they should be buying a colour that's going to express themselves, going to use the light well, and works in with their soft furnishings. But they also need the brushes, the rollers, the trays, the drop sheets, all the materials to clean up. That's your job as a salesperson. So we're not just aiming at the dollars, we're aiming at a quality outcome. And that's part of the recruitment process. And we're aiming at a quality outcome. And then we live with those people over the duration of the relationship. And Bunnings is a good example. It's a very old company. There are people who started at 16 and retired and never went anywhere else.
That's a great story. Thank you, Michelle. That's really lovely. Have we got time for any more questions?
We'll have to wrap it now, but look, let's continue the conversation over drinks and canapes outside.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Polly's coming over. I'm going to get off my feet because I collapse in a second.
Nicola, thank you so much for a fabulous job as our MC. I think in 20 years of professional development, I've never seen anybody put so much into preparing for a panel. And to our wonderful panellists tonight, to Jane, to Lynne, to Arthur, to Scott, to Faith, and to Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. If you did enjoy tonight and you want to drill a bit more into the employment law framework next week, along with performance management processes and some recent updates, Michelle is conducting an employment law masterclass over at River City Labs, and you can register with me tonight over at the registration desk. But thank you all for your wonderful questions and attendance tonight, and join us all now for some drinks and canapes outside. Thank you very much.